there's an agenda where you I think it's being passed out. Is that on?
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week I received an email, a copy of it, that was originally sent to Kenneth here, and I found it very offensive. I thought that what it said, the subject matter, was not proper, was totally improper. On one hand, it begins with working together and developing a good relationship. And then down further into this thing, it accuses a staff member of being incompetent and misrepresentation. Now, I think that that's wrong. That should not.
Dr. Silva, please excuse this interruption.
I don't excuse you.
If this commissioner has a document in his hand, would he either direct the rest of the board to where it is located in this material that has just been provided to us this moment, or would he simply hand out copies of what he's talking about?
You have a copy.
Where is it located?
It's on the email. It was sent to you.
Where is it located in these documents here?
It was in your email.
Where is it located in these documents here now?
Just a minute. Lee, could you provide copies of that? Just stand down for a second while I get this. Whether getting those copies, please review the budget calendar that we talked about.
On the budget calendar, I may not have been with it. I put boxes around the dates that are regular board meetings, and then highlight dates are the dates that were discussed for the budget, committee meetings, the budget hearing, et cetera.
Chair Sullivan. Carol, I assume when you have the highlight and the box, it's a board meeting. This is where we approve the calendar in February. I assume this refers to the point where we're expected to appoint members to the budget committee.
Yes, there's a note at the top of the calendar that states what's going to happen on those dates.
To continue, this accusation about Ms. Brag's work ethic and her competence, totally out of context. That should not be in here. That impinges her professional quality. And I think that she has proved, that she and her staff have proved that they're very competent, know what they're doing, and are able and qualified to do it. I don't see here where the accuser has a CPA or any extensive knowledge of accounting practices. I feel strongly that Ms. Breicher and her staff deserve an apology for this kind of language.
Dr. Silva?
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask the commissioner who it is that he's referring to is a CPA.
Our accountant?
Is our CPA, our accountant, a CPA?
As far as I know, yes.
Well, apparently you don't know very far. Because this
Mr.
Ms.
Sterling,
Reich is not a CPA.
Regardless of what you have
No.
to say,
No.
what this does,
It doesn't do
it
anything.
impinges her knowledge. Yes, it does.
It doesn't do anything except...
Point of order. I believe that Mr. Sterling has the floor.
He doesn't have us four because it didn't go through the chairman.
Well, I guess I didn't have the floor.
Yes?
Chair Soa, first of all, so far as I'm aware, our chief financial officer is not a certified public accountant. And as to arithmetic errors, I have the benefit, if it is a benefit, of having been on the board longer than Commissioner Kalani, and I have full documentation of a number of arithmetic errors. One that comes notably to mind is the letter that was distributed, I think it was last year, relative to the bond covenant compliance, which contained a $500,000 arithmetic error. Chair Sola, the materials that were submitted to the insurance company on the directors and officers application, which contained a major error. So, first of all, I do not believe that that is not a correct statement. Further, if you will refer to Oregon Public Meeting Law, you will find that if there's a complaint to be brought against a public official or an employee, it's to be done in executive session unless the subject of that complaint has requested that it be reviewed in a public meeting. And it also requires that any complaint that's going to be brought be presented to that person in advance of the meeting in sufficient time for that person to determine whether that person wants the discussion in executive session or in the public meeting. So, Chair Sola, I would recommend to you that you recommend to Commissioner Kalani that he acquaint himself more closely with Oregon Public Meeting Law, and that he perhaps do a little research before he launches on, he did a little research before he formed his opinion. Thank you.
Ms. Holloway, I believe Mr. Kalani's point is that you're bringing out this accusation in a public forum, which is open email to the public, and that this should only be brought forward in an executive session.
I did communicate it to the board, Chair Sola. I didn't communicate it to the public at large. Commissioner Kalani did that.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond? The email was sent to me, and only to me, and I forwarded it to all members of the board so that they would be aware of it, as well as to the general manager, which is where any complaint about an individual staff member should have gone in the first place. And it should not have been, what's the word I want? Well, it was an improper accusation in the first place, let alone unfounded. The numbers that you're referring to as far as the application for insurance are concerned, there was one typo error. There was not an arithmetic error, and that was corrected. It was also reviewed during the due diligence process of the insurance companies. They have no complaints about the forms that were submitted. And the real arithmetic error in that was the $5,100,000 alleged to not having been properly reported, when in fact the expenditure of funds from our reserves on projects that have been approved by the board is not considered to be deficit spending, which was an allegation that was also made. Again, I would second Mr. Kalani's position that making an accusation about staff and their competence and their professionalism is improper. If you have a complaint specifically to a specific staff member's performance, you direct that to the general manager, period. It is his responsibility to look into those things, and it's not something that should be put in emails to the board members without first having been handled by the general manager. I believe an apology to Ms. Bright is in fact due. That's my position. Thank you, sir.
Chair Sawyer.
Rather than recognize anybody else on this, I recommend that we refer this whole issue to our general manager and have him take appropriate action if he considers that there's a problem. We should talk about it in executive session and not in this open forum. So we'll go on to the next agenda, which is the budget calendar. In perusing that, do the board members find any problem with any of these dates?
Works for me, Mr. Chairman.
I believe that's what we agreed.
Okay. We'll go on to the next item then. Talking about legal counsel being on retainer. Who brought that forward?
Yes, this is Mr. Chairman, this is a item that was discussed briefly at the last meeting, where I was asked to at least meet with Mr. Phillips to entertain the notion if the retainer was something that he would consider. I have made contact with Mr. Phillips. He's indicated that he would and is willing to have that discussion. We have not had the specifics of that discussion, but at least we know that that's something that he's willing to talk about. So I think in the months to come, I'll be able to report back to the board more specifically.
On this agenda item, it says not Phillips. What does that mean?
Mr.
I
Chairman.
think that's a typo.
Mr. Chairman, I believe I can respond to that.
Yeah.
That reflects a comment made by Ms. Holloway in the previous session. She was not in favor of retaining Mr. Phillips and basically so stated at the previous meeting.
Okay, will you pursue that further now? Okay, to the board.
Yes.
And next, we have on the agenda,
Excuse me, Chair Sawyer.
yes.
I'd like to comment on that item if I may. I was surprised when you stated in the last meeting that we, quote, we, have been discussing placing an attorney on retainer. I would, and conceptually, as you know, I don't have a problem with that process. I do believe that under the terms of our local contract review board rules, that kind of an agreement, being a personal services agreement, would have to be subject at least to comparative bidding, not bidding, but comparative solicitation of proposals rather than a competitive bid. So I want to be sure that rather than, since the board the board as a whole hasn't authorized in any way having conversations with Mr. Phillips, that the board be aware that prior to any such undertaking, it's my understanding that we would be required to do at least a comparative selection process.
Mr. Chairman.
Would everyone need further than to briefly discuss it, consider about it at the board? Was there a notification that it may come up in the future?
Well, I guess what surprised me was that based on our very brief discussion in the last board meeting, that Mr. Ward said that he'd been asked to ask Mr. Phillips if he'd be willing to enter into that kind of agreement. So that was a piece of information I was not aware of.
Because that was the first step in order to figure out how we're going to keep our legal costs to a minimum.
As well, which I certainly applaud as a process. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just to make a point here, in the hiring of legal counsel, we do not have to go out to bid in any way, shape, or form. We can hire whatever attorney we choose. That is at the discretion of the board, totally and without requirement to go to bid.
If I may, Chair Soa, would you perhaps advise Mr. Kalani that that's exactly what I just said?
It didn't sound like it to me, but that's okay.
It's comparative rather than competitive. Read the LCOs, we'll find out.
And again, we can hire whatever attorney we choose as a board.
I don't disagree. What
Okay.
I said.
On third on the agenda is check 77540. And that request came from Mr. Thornton. I think you were provided with some material at the last meeting. Did that satisfy your interest, or do you want to go forward?
What material was that, Dr. Soa?
Things were handed out.
Mr. President, as I recall, this is information that Commissioner Sterling had requested to look at, and my recollection is he wanted more time to have that review, and that was one of the reasons. What this is that the board's executive assistant took those action items from the last meeting and reduced it to an agenda. So that's where this is coming from.
Do you need additional material for it?
My specific request was for the billing documents. I mean, I've repeated it, I believe, twice or 3 times. There is no billing documents in this agenda. Is something hidden inside this package here? Were the original billing documents from Mr. Phillips for in excess of $19,000 for that check is located at, Dr. Soa?
I was mistaken. I thought you were handed the material
Which
that you wanted. And you're only going to take time to look at it.
I wasn't handed any material regarding my request, Dr. Soa. Would you please ask staff to provide the actual copies of the bills totaling in excess of $19,000 submitted by Mr. Phillips, please?
I believe it, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's number 9 in the packet that Mr. Sterling has in front of him.
Yeah, we review number 9 and the fact that
Nobody wants computer for, computer purposes according to this agenda.
Stay a few minutes here.
This is certainly not a copy of the Phillips Law invoice for that $19,000. It's a document that was provided to the board probably 2 meetings ago, and it doesn't appear to me to satisfy either Commissioner Sterling's request or the next item on the list, which is my request for the legal services invoices from April 2012.
Okay, so that we'll make sure you get that information.
Dr. Soa?
Yeah.
Perhaps just as a basic review for yourself, you certainly have reviewed to Mr. Nixon's bill numerous times, having apparently changed your vote outside of the legal ramifications of your duty. I mean, how difficult is it to understand that this is what Commissioner Sterling is requesting? The actual billing information from Mr. Phillips. Please excuse me, but, you know, it's right here as an example, a template.
Do you have it now, or do you need?
No, this
more?
is Mr., what's his name? Mr. Moore's personal attorney, Mr. Nixon. This is his billing statement.
Mr. Chairman, that is an incorrect allegation. Mr. Nixon was not the personal attorney of Mr. Moore. Mr. Nixon represented the interests of CRW at that time and at that hearing, as was recognized by the court.
The court hasn't recognized anything.
Certainly it has.
It hasn't either.
It recognized that you held an illegal meeting
It
without a quorum.
has. Show me the document that has been filed with the court, Dr. Sola. Where is this document that this commissioner alleges? Where is it to be found?
Were you in court?
Don't need to be.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Soto?
The court's decision was quite clear.
Where is it? Where's the signed document that states the court's position? You think it's so funny?
The fact that we're here is proof enough.
No, it's not. You've got to be kidding me. What world are you living in?
Mr. Sterling, please address all your comments.
I was.
To the chair.
You didn't object to him saying anything, Dr. Sola? Now, before we move on, sir, without any disrespect, is there any doubt in your mind as to what I'm looking for, sir, in regards to this?
No,
You're not going to have any difficulty asking management to produce it for the ratepayers?
no.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Soto?
I assume that covers your next request also.
It does. Thank you, Dr. Soto.
Okay. We'll move on then.
Dr. Soto? Sir?
Yes.
May I
Come
public
forward.
comment? Thank you.
Before she gets started, Mr. Chairman,
Come forward, but he's going to talk.
I just want to be certain that the appropriate redactions take place in any documents that you submit.
And this is Mr. Chairman, this is the invoice that Mr. Phillips has sent us. That's why we know how much the amount is.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Go ahead.
Cindy Lewis Wolf from Citizen, Milwaukee. Dr. Soa, I'm sure that the redaction has come up several times. I've heard Commissioner Sterling, Commissioner Holloway mention that they want unredacted documents. However, there was and I'm not sure if any of the new commissioners are aware of this, but there was a board vote on redacting those documents. It was a majority vote to send or make available, I should say, redacted copies of those invoices due to the fact that Commissioner Holloway and or Commissioner Sterling were in a conflict with CRW at the time. So I just want to make sure that information got through to the board if you had not been aware of it, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure, so if I may, I'm terribly sorry that this seems to be disintegrating into the old board, but nonetheless, Ms. Lewis Wolf from, as the record will show, did make an incorrect statement. Relative to conflict of interest, that is, at least in terms of the Ethics Commission, a pecuniary conflict of interest. I would say that the financial conflict of interest relative to this issue of those legal services really is a conflict on the part of Mr. Kalani and Mr. Humberston, not you. Because and it is, after all, Mr. Moore's legal bill that you decided to pay. There's been no payment of any legal bill on our side. Second, I have obtained, and we will be submitting to the Supreme Court the transcript of the hearing. And I believe that when Mr. Kalani has opportunity to review that he will see that the inclusion of Mr. Moore as a party in standing relative to that litigation was only in connection with his employment at Clackamas River Water, not in any other way. And since we're not quite off the topic yet, I would point out that I did very carefully go through Mr. Nixon's invoice, and I understand why Commissioner Sterling and I both want a copy of that invoice, because there are over 20 contacts between Mr. Phillips and Mr. Nixon. There are multiple contacts between Mr. Nixon, Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Madcore. There are multiple contacts between Mr. Phillips, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Madcore, and Mr. Moore. So, insofar as Mr. Nixon's invoice is a public and unredacted document, there's absolutely no reason to think that those matching, that Mr. Phillips' invoice relative to anything to do with the litigation between Clackamas River Water and Clackamas County should in any way be redacted. And in fact, personally, I'm quite concerned that CRW may have in fact paid, obviously has paid, Mr. Phillips' legal costs in connection with Mr. Nixon. So I do think it's an issue that needs to be fully vetted. Thank you, Chair.
Number 5, Jan?
Yeah. With respect to the payment of Mr. Nixon's fees, I think we should point out something, and that is that the board acted improperly by taking the issue of Mr. Nixon's fees out of the general manager's report and actually making an action item of it and voting on it when it was not an action item on the agenda for the public to be aware of. So the correction on the part of the general manager of that error actually was beneficial to the board. With respect to who he represented, he clearly represented CRW in the case regarding the illegal meeting that 2 other commissioners held. The bill was also reduced by $2,000 as a result of a question raised by the chair, as was appropriate. And finally, let us not forget that it is well within the scope of the authority of the general manager, up to $50,000, to pay CRW's bills. So he was acting well within the scope of his authority as the general manager. And even if we had lowered it to $30,000, as has been suggested, then he still would have been well within his authority to pay the bill. The final point would be that Mr. Nixon provided the services and had right to be compensated thereby because he provided those services for this board and this district. Had we not paid that bill, he would have had a claim in court that would have been considerably more expensive than simply paying the bill. So for all intents and purposes, paying the bill was absolutely the most appropriate thing to do and was well within the scope of the authority of the general manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Soa,
Yes.
I request that you take and produce the document that takes and employs Mr. Nixon and was agreed to and voted upon by the Board of Commissioners. Where is that document?
I'm not sure what the question is.
You want to produce the document where the board voted to hire Mr. Nixon?
Oh, that's unnecessary. There was not a full board, so it was up to the general manager under the terms of his contract and how this form of government works to defend the interests of the district, and that's what he did.
Dr. Soa, in response to this gentleman's accusation there wasn't a full board, you have Commissioner Kemper, who was a board member. You have Commissioner Holloway, who was a board member. You have Commissioner Sterling, who was a board member. That is 3 board members, which represents a majority of the 5. It's just that simple. And it's just that simple that it's documented and will be so presented to the Supreme Court of Oregon.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
There were not 3 in attendance, and according to the very policy that we have in our policy manual. For action to be taken by the board, there must be 3 members in attendance and voting unanimously. That failed to occur.
Chair Soa, if I may.
Go ahead.
I wasn't aware that Mr. Kalani is our new legal counsel.
My name is Mr. Humphrey.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
I beg your pardon. I beg your, I
You keep blaming me
apologize.
for things that I didn't do, not that I object to it necessarily.
I apologize, Mr. Kalani.
I would
was
like
not-
to get involved, yes.
I was not aware that Mr. Henderson's our new legal counsel. He does seem to be trying to assume that role. I would just remind the
I
board.
might
Yes,
just interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Everson is the secretary of this board, and as that, he does have authority to speak.
Well, we all have authority to speak. I was just commenting on his legal opinions. What I would like to remind the board of is that during that meeting where Mr. Nixon presented the bill, Mr. Moore declared during that meeting that he had a conflict of interest, which is why he had not put the bill forward. And so, you know, I mean, those are his words. Well, I transcribed the whole section, I'll give it to you verbatim.
I'm not saying anything.
So in any case, plus, as I looked at item 5, well, two things. The $50,000 limit is in fact a contracting limit, and I do have for the board today the documents that establish that it has nothing to do with Mr. Moore's contract whatsoever. Second, the retention of counsel is covered in board policy, not in Mr. Moore's contract, and I have all that information for you. Third, this email from Mr. Moore to Ms. Bright dated December 20th says the board majority has reaffirmed that the amount owing is within my signature authority as the general manager and CRW PCO. PCO means public contracting officer. In fact, at Clackamas River Water, the board is the public contracting officer. Mr. Moore should be fully aware of that. It was discussed in the meeting with Mr. Moore, Mr. Phillips, and, what the heck was his name? The outside attorney that Mr. Phillips brought in to speak to the board.
Wilson?
Dan Olson. So, nothing has changed within the local contract review board rules. Any change that would have been made would have to be made by the board. And so, I can tell you, and I can certainly document for you, that Mr. Moore is not the public contracting officer. Now, relative to, well, I'll wait till we move on to that item to make my other comments. Thank you, Jefferson.
President Sullivan,
Yes.
just one comment about Mr. Humberson's background in terms of legalities. He does have a son-in-law who is a CPA, a major firm, another son-in-law who is a legal counsel for a large corporation. He has gotten advice from them.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I notice under functions of the board that by resolution, the board designates itself as CRW's local contract review board. We review contracts.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
Section 1.3, functions of the board, item A2. By resolution, the board will designate itself as CRW's local contract review board pursuant to OAR 125-300-0001. That's review. That doesn't make us the contracting officers.
Chair, so if I may, I will provide the documentation to correct Commissioner Humberson's misunderstanding. I may be able to put it before the meeting's over, but I'm not sure.
We'll move on to the next subject. Item number 5. Mr. Sterling's request for information on check number 77444. Did the information you provided satisfy you, Mr.
No, the information provided lacks section 2, item number E, scope of work, did not include exhibit C, and I request that.
Which item are we on, Mr. Chairman?
5?
Thank you.
Item number 6. And Mr. Sterling's request on it, check number 77456.
Dr. So, I didn't hear you request the management to provide the commissioner with exhibit C, the scope of work. Is that your intention?
Yes.
Would you make sure that management acknowledges what your intention is, please, Dr. So?
As soon as we get down through these checks, we'll do that.
Chair Sella, if I may ask Mr. Bunner to make a copy. This is the documentation that the board is entitled to the contracting officer. That I think that Mr. Bunner requires.
Actually, we don't. If I may respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Again, under section 2.7, selection and duties of legal counsel, item C, the general manager or authorized staff has authority to seek legal counsel from CRW's counsel as deemed advisable by the general manager on matters relating to legal issues. He acted well within the scope of his authority under our own bylaws.
Chair Sella, I'm sorry this seems to be turning into a tennis match, but
Things we keep talking about, item 7, let's jump to it and get taken care of.
yeah, well, because this is relative to item 7. So, Mr. Bunyer, if you would please kindly, oops, there he is. You'd ask Mr. Bunyer to make copies of that for please. Actually, copies of both of them. That'd be great. Thank you, sir. What I am asking Mr. Bunyer to make copies of for the board, copies of 2 Clackamas River Review as potential water resolutions. Resolution number 30-2008 and 21-2009. Did we get them both? Oh, I have
You
to
can
get
make
them.
copies of that.
Thank you.
Those two.
And in Resolution 21-2009, which we'll be receiving copies of, one of the whereas says, whereas the CRW board has adopted a resolution number 5-2008, designating the board as the public contracting officer, PCO, for Clackamas River. And so that resolution became effective on January 14, 2009, signed by, at that time, Commissioner C. Wolfram as president and myself as secretary. So I don't think there's any doubt that, in fact, the board is the public contracting officer. It's fully documented in our resolution. So we'll all have copies of that shortly. And I guess if I may continue, oops, let me get my board policy here. Mr. Humberston, oops, read a selection from the board policy, but didn't quite get to all of it. Do you all have, board, you all have your board policy available? section 2.7. If not, I'll read it for you.
2.7?
2.7. Selection and duties of legal counsel. As Mr. Hurston correctly read, the general manager or authorized staff has authority to seek legal counsel from CRW's counsel as deemed advisable by the general manager on matters relating to legal issues. Upon engagement of special counsel, the general manager shall immediately advise the board of such engagement. Now, certainly Mr. Nixon, were he CRW counsel, would be a special counsel. As Commissioner Sterling pointed out earlier, at the point Mr. Nixon was retained, which apparently is October the 30th, 2012, there were 3 seated Clackamas River Water Commissioners. Even if there'd only been one, the general manager was still obligated to make that notification. That notification was not given. Further, in Mr. Nixon's presentation to the board, he stated that Mr. Moore had retained him because Mr. Moore did not have access to legal counsel, presumably meaning Dean Phillips. As Mr. Nixon's invoice clearly shows, Mr. Phillips was certainly available and was even available to meet with Mr. Moore. So I have a little problem with the statement with first of all, Mr. Nixon's statement that he was only hired because Mr. Moore didn't have access to Mr. Phillips, when in fact Mr. Moore did have access to Mr. Phillips, which is clearly established by Mr. Nixon's invoice, and I think likely will be confirmed by Mr. Phillips' invoice. So we have a whole lot of issues here, and I guess to tackle perhaps for this board, the very biggest one of all, is the email, where is it, that Mr. Moore sent to Ms. Reich. No, I misplaced it. Oh, I got it here, thank you. That says, be advised that the majority of the board has reconsidered its vote from the last scheduled board meeting for Michael Nixon's legal invoice. The bill has been revised downward by $1,900. The board majority has reaffirmed that the amount, well, it says owning, I think he meant owing, is within my signature authority as the general manager and CRW PCA and consistent with my contract. Well, I've already addressed the fact that his utilization of legal counsel has nothing to do with his contract whatsoever. It's only connected, it only arises out of board policy, and we've discussed that. I have discussed already that the general manager is, not the public contracting officers.
Thank you.
And so now we come down to the concern that we've apparently, by Mr. Moore's wording, had a non-publicly noticed Clackamas River Water meeting by which a majority of commissioners made a decision, or we had however it happened, I mean, it's Mr. Moore's wording, not mine. So I guess we have to discuss as the board how that could possibly happen. And because it's against the law.
Mr. Chairman?
And Mr. Hurston.
Again, I'll refer to our own board policies, which are newer than this resolution, updated on 8/2011. It's the general manager is allowed to hire counsel as deemed advisable on matters relating to legal issues. But I would like to hear from the general manager, since he was considerably more intimately involved than any of us in this. I'd like him to go ahead and give us the timeline and explanations. Probably can be more succinct than I was. Go ahead.
I'm looking at the Public Contract Review Board rules. Contained in my binder is Resolution 21, 2009. Under Section 2, the board hereby delegates to the general manager to execute contracts as defined in CRW Local Contract Review Board rules up to the amount of $50,000. Any contract entered into by the general manager under this delegated authority shall be included as a part of the general manager's written report to the board as part of a regular meeting of the board. The first regular meeting of the board was when this particular board took office. And therefore, it was a part of my general manager's report as required by the resolution that was signed in 2009.
So now, can we move on?
I, no, we can't.
Oh, really?
I mean, I don't believe we can. Check some
You're gonna argue all day?
Well, we, let's see, let me find something here, hold on.
Chairman,
Well,
somebody in the back had their hand up.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes, does Mr. Moore have a contract with Mr. Nixon? He's mentioned a contract.
Yes.
Yes. The answer is yes.
May we see it?
I don't have it.
Chair
I
So,
believe it's a public document, you can see it.
Thank you.
Chair So, exactly. Mr. Moore just referenced a resolution and, or a section, board policy or resolution? I'm sorry, there were so many
It was a
documents.
resolution that I
Okay.
was reading.
And the resolution states that he will present that contract to the board at its next regular meeting. Now, that contract, which Mr. Moore just confirmed exists, has not been presented to the board. So we have no idea what it says. If you take a close look at the invoice submitted by Mr. Nixon, it was not until somewhere around November 5 that the petition for declaratory judgment was filed with the court. And up to that point, he had already run up some $9,900 in fees. I don't have any idea where that $1,900 number came from. I couldn't identify anything as that. And I would also point out to you that his filings with the court, as he started his flurry of ex parte motions, were focused on protecting Mr. Moore's employment in Clackamas River Water. I do not believe that, number one, the board having made a motion, or had a motion made to pay the invoice and had that motion fail at a public board meeting, the general manager not having provided the board with the contract, so we really don't know what we're talking about here. With the circumstance that Mr. Nixon incurred up to $9,900, purely researching Mr. Moore's position. And Mr. Moore's own statement that the board majority has reaffirmed, the majority of the board has reconsidered its vote from the last scheduled meeting. So I just don't understand why, if a board made a vote in one meeting, that 3 of its members, absent another board meeting, can reverse that. I just don't think that that's legal.
Let me say what happened. I talked to Mrs. Moore afterwards and said, the part of Mr. Nixon's contract that I will not pay is the part where he took 2 board members to court and filed, I forget what it was, an injunction against them. And I said, I will not pay legal fees for a lawyer that does action against our board members. And I said I was okay with the rest of the bill because we were represented in court by Mr. Nixon. And that's all I know. And so he agreed to reduce the bill by the amount that he had charged for going to court with that. Was that injunction? Yes, it was an injunction. And so we're not paying for that.
Well,
and that's all I know about the issue. And then people took it from there. I don't know who contacted who or what.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, then you had a conversation relative to your personal view of it with Mr. Moore. Then somehow between that point and this point, that translated into a majority of the board has reconsidered its vote. Now, how, I know you're the board president, but you're not a majority, you're just one. So there must have been some, obviously, unless Mr. Morris misrepresented what happened, a majority of board members told him outside a board meeting without another vote that it was okay to pay that bill. I mean, that's what he says.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes?
You know, I find this really amusing. We spent $27,000 on an attorney to defend the interests of this district because you 2 people held a meeting that was improper and held to be improper by the court. You did not have a quorum. It did not follow your own board guidelines. And so $27,000 had to be spent to prove in a court of law that a majority of 5 is 3, not 2. And only 2 attended the meeting. So to then turn this around and try to make it a problem for the general manager is ridiculous. The fact is that you acted improperly. And you can giggle all you want. The reality is that you acted improperly. The court so found, and that is how we ended up getting sworn in. So to turn this around on the general manager and try to pick at the language is ridiculous. The fact is that our own policy allowed him to do this. Your own resolution even goes further in Section 3, indicating that he has the authority to execute emergency contracts, which at least legally speaking, that is what that constituted, since there was no full board available. So, you know, we can spend all day long arguing this back and forth, but the fact is that the bill got paid as it should have been for services rendered on behalf of this district, and had you not had your rump meeting as it was described in the newspaper, we wouldn't be sitting there having this conversation. So why don't we move on, because the bill is in fact paid, and get something else done.
Chair Saw, if I may. Chair Saw, I would just put forth the information that, in fact, the issue was being handled by the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners. They were fully active and involved the entire time. It was their issue about appointing members to this board that was litigated. And they absorbed all the cost for that. There was absolutely no need for Mr. Nixon to be involved in any way, shape, or form, except to protect the interest of Mr. Moore. And as I say, the transcript of the hearing, the judge specifically stated that Mr. Nixon Moore had standing because it impacted Mr. Moore's employment with Clackamas River Water.
Thank you for saying that. You said that before, and people that know me know that I don't like lawyers, or people that act like lawyers. And so we're going to move on, assuming that some lawyers someday will probably argue this out in court and solve the problem. Next issue is back up to Place 6, I think it is, check number 77456. Mr. Sterling, have you received enough information about this check?
Well, the important issue is that the check for $27,665, I put forth as a motion at this time that it not be paid. And I put forth also within the motion that Mr. Nixon returns the funds pending disposition of the action in the Judge Jones Court, which no one seems to have a signed document from him, as well as the Oregon Supreme Court as to the ruling in regards to the appointment by the BCC. Until those issues are taken care of, the ratepayers' money needs to be placed back in the CRW account. Do I have a second?
Mr. Sterling, I'll rule that motion out of order because we moved on from that subject. And we're back on to number 6, which is check number 77456. Have you received enough information on that check to satisfy you?
Referring to Wonderware LLC, is that the correct one that we're on? Looking at the license file exchange agreement, recital, section A, not provided was part 3 of exhibit A, referred to as attached herein. In the body of the agreement, section 4, license agreement updated in the firm affirmation, exhibit B was not provided.
I believe that covers the checks that Mr. Turing was concerned about. Will you provide him that additional information on both the 456 and 444? Now we'll go on to issue 8, which Mr. Sterling is concerned about random testing. Have you received enough information on that?
I was going to get an email from Medora, but not at this time. Obviously, I'm not going to take up the public's time at this point to take and review this. It obviously is extensive and consumes, as of yet, what would appear to be a document, operations manual and policies that I have requested previously to see the original document. would you please request management to provide the original document to me referring to operations manual and policies and procedures? Volume 1, please, Dr. Phillips.
Yes. You don't want a copy, you want the original?
No, I'd like to have the original, please.
Thank you.
It will take 5 business days once I receive it to take and properly review the information contained, as well as to check on the information copied and provided here today.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I believe the general manager has a point here.
Mr. Chairman, we will provide to Mr. Sterling a copy of the manual. We're not going to let original documents out of the building.
Item number 9, computer purchases, including software. Who requested that on the agenda?
Commissioner Hallett.
Okay.
Actually, I do recall.
No, I do believe that was, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. That was Commissioner Sterling. He had indicated that he wanted copies of was that the $900,000 in computer purchases. So that information was provided.
Thank you.
I believe it was $90,000, not $900,000.
Mr. Sterling, did you get enough information on that issue?
No, but the matter of the fact still remains that within the issue that I sent to you, there was no request as far as the specific documentation. It was an accumulative number that has occurred over the last 2 years, perhaps 3 years, in regards to the amount of money that is showing within the budget having been spent. I did not request the staff to take an further cost to ratepayers any additional money in regards to the $900,000 figure. It was quite clear that that was simply in parentheses. The issue was in regards to the water purchase by Sunrise.
Mr. Chairman, the email that I received that I forwarded to the general manager had to do with an allegation that was $900,000 spent on computers. So I asked the general manager to give us that information. The total, if I understand the documents correctly, the total of computers alone was, in the last 5 years during his tenure, was approximately $94,000. And the total, including peripherals, software, upgrades, and computer assistance services from outside agencies, totaled approximately $450,000, not $900,000. As board secretary, it appeared to me that it was being alleged that and I don't mean that in the negative sense of the word, that $900,000 was being spent. That seemed like a lot of money to me. I asked them to give us the documentation, and it turns out, even with all of it included, it's approximately $450,000, which is about half of $900,000. And I was also informed by the general manager that we used to have 25 servers, and in the process of upgrading our server systems and whatnot like that, we've been able to reduce that down to 12 servers. So it would seem to me that it wasn't unreasonable in terms of the amount of money spent over the last 5 years, especially considering the serious equipment upgrades that were necessary, recognizing that we are a FEMA agency and need to be up to speed at all times. But I will own that. I asked for that additional information based on my interpretation of the email I received from Mr. Sterling.
Sure, so if I may, these numbers are not current. They are through June 30th, 2012. And these come from our accounts payable records. I don't have the latest numbers I say, but
It's still not 900,000. I'm sorry, excuse me. Shouldn't have done that.
computer hardware and software, at least according to the accounts payable records that I have, are close to $512,000. And then in the original number, which I believe I came up with quite some time ago, the balance between that and I think it was $804,000, I'm reading from memory, was in consulting fees. So I have all that information, including check numbers, et cetera. I'd be happy to provide it to the board.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes?
Briefly, the thing that concerns me is that if this commissioner has been able to take and extract from the management and staff some $400,000 in expenditures related to computers, why has he not chosen to share that with the rest of the board?
Is it not in your packet?
Which packet?
You have all your information there. I have mine here.
And if you can, I will provide that to the board at the next meeting, including check numbers.
I guess I have to ask, for what purpose? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Well,
To what purpose? I mean,
well,
we
if,
bought computers, we bought peripherals, we got software, we got assistance.
well,
What's the point?
the manager said it.
Yes?
The point seems to be that there are two sets of numbers out there. One suggesting an awful lot of expenditure and the other suggesting relatively minimal expenditure. So rather than have it be a confusion, if that's in fact the issue, I think it's better that the board have the information.
We'll look at your documents between now and next meeting and go on to item number 10.
Thank you.
As somebody asked, would this be on the agenda?
I think that was Mr. Stone.
Mr. Sterling.
I'm not going to linger long on the issue. It can be taken up further into the springtime when other issues pertaining to who's actually on the board and who the taxpayers and the voters actually determine who will be sitting on the board for the following years. It appears to me that the signature of the previous board president comes into question. And I feel through the legal process this coming spring, it'll clearly denote as to the specific time element in which this person signed the document.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes?
Based on, and since Ms. Holloway likes to go with her own numbers, based on her own numbers that it was sometime in August that Ms. Kehoe is alleged to have left the district, and this was signed on or about June 21st, and that is when the actual meeting took place, which in and of itself constitutes the contract, regardless of the document. This is an addendum. That strikes me as irrelevant, but I'll just leave it at that.
Sure, so
I think, just as a comment, I think the law is clear that, from my point of view, that once somebody moves out of the district, there has to be an action taken to remove them from the board. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, that issue certainly will be being resolved. It's unfortunate that we didn't establish when Ms. Kehoe moved out of the district. I believe that's what Commissioner Sterling may be referring to, whether she was even in the district at the time that board motion was made. When this does come up for discussion again, the document that was produced does not in fact echo the motion that was made. So we have a number of things to look at when we do look at it.
And finally, Dr. Soa, if you would please,
Yes?
you're going to find that when the issue goes before a court, whether it's Judge Jones or the Oregon Supreme Court, when an elected official hides or conceals an illegal action, there is no recourse except for their removal from office.
Thank you.
I think you have a question in the back, Mr. Chairman?
Pardon?
My name is David Blair, I live in Milwaukee. This document, it contains the signatures of, supposedly the signature of Ms. Kehoe and Mr. Moore is undated. This document is legally worthless. I have worked enough time in contracts to be able to state that with some assurance. There is no way to establish when this thing was signed, whether she was on the board, whether the signatures are genuine. And Mr. Moore has demonstrated massive ignorance of contracts in the past, and I think this is just an example of his sloppiness on contracts.
Thank you for your opinion.
Thank you.
We'll now go into the subject to insurance. You want to have some comment on that?
I have had questions regarding the information submitted on one of the applications. And I just, I think we're here. And I have a question I told the board at the last meeting that I would provide them with some additional information. My concern, there are several. One was the revenue and expenditure numbers. And if I may ask Ms. Bright a question. Joseph?
Yes?
It appears that what was excluded from the numbers was in fact depreciation. Is that correct?
It is not quite that simple. The numbers that you referred to in your document that you provided to the board were taken from the audited financial reports from the government-wide section of the reports. Those numbers included operating revenues and operating expenses. The operating expenses did indeed include depreciation. However, those expenses did not include capital outlay that were paid from the general fund, not capital improvement projects, but the capital outlay. So the assets that we purchased that have a longer than 1 year life. The revenue number from the government-wide statements also included simply the operating revenues, did not include revenues that we earned from renting out part of this building. It did not include interest earnings on the balances that we have in account and other miscellaneous non-operating income.
Ms. Bright, excuse me for interrupting you. I think I can save some time here. I'm not concerned with my numbers. What I was trying to determine was where did your numbers come from?
When we were asked to fill out these applications, I determined that it would be more prudent to provide simply the operating numbers from the general fund. So I included all revenue in the general fund, which does include the rental income as well as the interest income. I did not include interest income from any other sources. I included all of the expenditures, including the capital outlay. So I presented a rather conservative amount. So I did not include SDC revenues. I didn't include interest revenues anywhere else. I presented in the applications the dollars that it takes to operate the district getting water from the river to our customers.
Okay, so, but bottom line, I mean, the big number that made the difference was depreciation. Right, because that's close to 2 million a year.
Yes.
I mean, that's the only place that a number that big could come from, right?
Yes, and again, in governmental accounting, depreciation is not an expenditure. We do government-wide reporting, which was something that came up about 12 years ago. It's the Government Accounting Standards Board, issue number 34, that requires us to account for our assets differently than what governments historically did. And in that case, you do include the expense of depreciation.
Okay, I mean, that's fine. That was the question, one of the questions I was asking. Another of the questions was, well, there are a number of missing pieces from the application that the board did not receive. I documented that in, let's see, the loss history information was missing. That's not been provided. The one question related to knowledge of acts, errors, et cetera. Right after this was signed on December the 28th. On December the 31st, Mr. Nixon, on behalf of Mr. Moore, filed a notice of intent to file tort claim against Commissioner Sterling and me. Another reason I think it's his personal attorney. And so there are still several issues, and I believe that Commissioner Humberston provided you with a full copy of this. If you would be kind enough to provide the missing information, I would appreciate it. Some of the other information relative to staff suspensions, terminations, et cetera, I really do believe is something that should be discussed in executive session, not in a public meeting. So I'm still listening.
Commissioner Holloway, you need to take and direct your request to Dr. Sola.
Oh, sorry, Dr.
And then
Sola.
Dr. Sola needs to instruct
Sorry.
staff as to provide what information or documentation that you're requesting.
Thank you. Yes, Chair, so I'm requesting the missing information as documented here. And I still would like to have an executive session to discuss the other information that I do think should have been on there that was not, but it's not appropriate for public.
According to public executive session law, what qualifies it for an executive session? In my reading, it does not qualify.
Okay, well, in that case, I would submit that it's my opinion, based on my knowledge of the history of Clackamas River water and the documentation in my possession, that there is information that should have been included on that form that was not. And it's documented here. If you wish to make a public document, then so be it.
And Dr. Sola, subsequent to that, the exclusion of those pertinent parts to the application effectively constitute a fraud against the insurance company. And that's something that needs to be discussed further and in depth in executive session.
Are you alleging that a fraud was committed? Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Well, it's my document, it didn't. It asked
I'm
questions.
asking Commissioner Sterling. Are you alleging that a fraud was committed, Mr. Sterling?
What part of my statement are you having difficulty understanding?
You're the one.
What part of my request to Dr. Sola is it that you don't understand, Commissioner? You want me to repeat it again?
I want you to answer my question.
Do you want me to repeat what I requested of Dr. Sola again?
No, I want you to answer
Well,
my
then there's
question.
no need to take and bother these public and extend the staff here any longer. It's quite clear what I requested.
Are you done?
I don't think so. This is just getting started. The tip of the iceberg is only appearing.
Commissioner, you're the one that used the term fraud. I'm asking you specifically, are you alleging that a fraud was committed? That's all I'm asking. That's a simple yes or no question.
I've already made my statement as to where the appropriate method of these issues need to be discussed. Now,
I
if Dr.
understand.
Sola wants to address it and say something differently, then you need to address the question to Dr. Sola. That's why I put his name forth as president of this board.
If you are alleging...
You might get by with that in Dunsmuir, but you're not going to get by with it here in Clackamas County.
If you are alleging a fraud, then it would probably be proper to discuss that in executive session. And so I'm simply asking if you are alleging a fraud, in which case we could probably have an executive session. But if you are not alleging a fraud, then I fail to see where we should have an executive session. It's that simple.
Well,
It
fortunately,
has nothing,
Point-
and by the way, it
Point
has
of
not-
order,
Excuse me, I have the floor.
not against a point of order. Chair Sola, I would respectfully request that you request commissioners in order to make their statements to you as you have indicated you wish the meeting to proceed. Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, we could do it that way. Would you ask Commissioner Sterling if he is alleging a fraud? Because that would be a condition under which we would have to go into executive session.
Commissioner Sterling, are you alleging a fraud and requesting an executive session?
I'm standing by the statement that I made. It's just that simple. I have no intention of allowing some foreigner to take and twist my words. If you choose not to have an executive session, that is your prerogative, Dr. Sola. It's just that simple.
It's not that I choose to have an executive session or not.
It isn't?
You're not allowed by the state law to have an executive session under certain circumstances. And at this point, I see no no justification for having an executive session. But if you're alleging
That's your opinion
fraud-
then, is that correct?
No,
Dr.
if you're
Sola?
alleging fraud, then we can have an executive session.
Well, I'm standing by exactly what I said. I'm not going to change my statement, period. You can evaluate it, Dr. Sola, and you can make your decision whether you feel that it's necessary or not. I'm not getting out of the canoe in midstream.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
may I respond to the personal attack?
Yes.
As I recall, my birth certificate says born in Long Beach, California. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. I'm entitled to live where I darn well please and apply for and serve on publicly elected boards as the public sees fit. And I understand that I will be subject to election, which is fine. That's the way it should be. But to suggest that in some manner I am a foreigner is absurd. I would suggest you look at the statistics about who lives in this state and many other states. People move from state to state all the time. And I think that that was a very inappropriate comment on your part, sir.
To try to get to some conclusion on this, we have a couple of people from the audience that would like to testify. Otis Blair has already testified. We have Warren Mitchell, who wants to testify.
Actually, number 4 on in this board packet, or I guess the board packet you put out on the table. Number 4, it's from Lee Moore to Carol Bright. Now, is this the minutes of this, unless you want me to read it, it's just about that board majority change on payment for Nixon. Is this a summary minutes for the meeting that conspired after the original vote? Or is there a lot more documents that I could request free of charge to do with the meeting that you know, deeper details of this summary of the minutes?
No legal meeting was held that I know of, and so there was no minutes kept.
Okay, so there's no record that I could get other than this transcribed document of that supposed meeting?
I think Mr. Moore used some words that are unclear. I assume he polled the majority of the commission to make that statement, but I don't know.
Okay, so there was no notice?
I talked to him personally about it, and I don't know if any of the other board members on an individual basis talked to him, either by phone or directly.
Okay, could I request, because it does say that board majority, and he's referring to apparently 3 board members, so can I get any written or transcribed documents from him? And also,
If he has any, I'm sure he can.
and also a public notice
But there was
meeting?
no board meeting that was
Okay,
held.
so there was no publicly noticed meeting. All right, thank you.
That's all. Number 10 was added, I would like to speak
Come
on.
forward, please.
What, excuse me?
Come forward, please.
Number 10 was added to this agenda, I didn't speak on that. If there are inaccuracies in the application for that insurance, you have no insurance. I know as a fact, and can testify if necessary, that it is inaccurate in regard to termination of employees. I believe there have been at least 4 terminations. I've been attending meetings for over 6 years, longer than Commissioner Holloway. There are inaccuracies or deliberate omissions from that application, and were I a board, I would more than likely want to really be sure that that thing is accurate, whether it's fraud or incompetence or just inadvertent mistakes. That is an inaccurate description coming out of that insurance. Thank you.
Just for the public notification, that application was made out and given to our insurance agent, who went over it and looked at it and approved it. And so if there's any comeback from the insurance company, it would be covered by his malpractice or whatever you call that insurance.
Mr. President, I think we're about to wrap up now. I thought there was one more comment I would like to make, and that's towards staff. They've heard a lot the last few meetings, and I've only been to, 6 meetings since we started. On behalf of myself, and I don't know how many other, but at least 1/5 of this commission, apologize for some of the things that have been said about you, your work product, and your general demeanor. And as far as I've seen, every one of you has been very professional, very competent, and I want to thank you for your ability to stick with it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll wrap up now, but I'd just like to state to the public and to the commissioners, this was a special meeting, and I allowed so-called back and forth, which I tried to stop and didn't always work. But at our next board meeting, we'll go back to our original policy, which will limit the discussion on certain issues. And with that, we are adjourned.